You're about to enter a new dimension where boundaries of life sciences, data, and technology blur, and AI reshapes what's possible. Welcome to the Improzone, powered by Improzo.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Improzone. I am delighted to have my guest today is Mr. Navdeep Singh. He is a absolute expert in this field. He's got over 2 decades, as a lot of us have now, of experience in customer success and enterprise transformation. And he's actually worked in the life sciences for almost all of that. And so it's from commercial to R&D to manufacturing to regulatory. I am so excited to have him here today to talk through kind of where we're going with generative AI. But I also want to let him introduce himself. So, Navdeep, by all means, please take the mic.
Absolutely. Hello, Jane. Thank you for having me. I'm a customer success leader aligned with healthcare and life sciences vertical at AWS. Over the last few years, I have spent majority of my time working with the world's largest pharma and biotech organizations to solve the hardest part of AI, which is moving them from pilots to productions. Before AWS, I spent majority of my career at Cisco, building and running professional services organizations. So I bring two lenses to the conversation. The first one is about world-class AI technology through AWS, and the second one is world-class customer success disciplines through Cisco. And I believe both of these practices are needed for a successful AI deployment.
I love it. It's so helpful. And one other thing I make sure I always say at the beginning here, these are the views of these conversations are our own. We're not trying to represent our organizations per se in these conversations. So obviously you have to represent all of AWS in your comments. It's just your experience in your life, just so we're on that same like plane of understanding. And the other thing, because you've spent so much time across all the different components of the life sciences, many people are really entrenched in one or the other, right? Like it's kind of you're in R&D or you're in commercial and there's this sort
Mhm.
of silos. But you've worked across the silos. So what are some of the patterns that you see with technology adoption in kind of the different silo spaces? Like what makes it work? What makes it kind of get stuck when you look at those different functional areas?
Sure. It's interesting that across the silos, I see that organizations and groups who are focusing on adoption and change management from the very beginning understand the organization culture and see what comes first. Is this adoption driven change management or change management followed by adoption, and making sure that it's an integral pillar of the overall solution and workflow are the ones who are successful. Others who end up building solutions which are sitting on the side and where the end users were not kept into the mind from the very beginning are the ones which I see are not that successful or sometimes they fail. So the big picture is missing on that front. The second pattern is where we focus on problem first. Are the use cases that I see succeed? But use cases where we see the platform first approach are the ones that do not go that far, simply because as humans, we gravitate towards the platforms, technologies that we're comfortable with. And sometimes we do not look around the corner where what's the right tool for the right problem. Last but not the least, as we are diving into this particular domain, the trust is very important. How can a scientist trust that my coworker, my companion is doing the right job for me? See that when we are building solutions in partnership with the knowledge workers, end users, slowly and gradually starting small and making sure that we are taking input at the right time and solving problems along the way are the ones that stick. So those are the three things that I widely see.
That makes sense. And I think it's interesting to think about the workflow and how you embed things into an existing workflow versus a massive sort of platform overhaul.
Mhm.
And I'm curious when you talk about the idea of these sort of complex automation efforts that are more successful sometimes
Mhm.
than a simpler thing like a chatbot. What is the reason for that kind of unexpected result?
That's something we learned through lessons here in AR world over the last 3 years or so. So the very first thing is executive sponsorship. I've seen that given the type of drastic shift that we are into now, the projects that have strong sponsorship, not cheerleading, are the ones that succeed.
Right.
So a leader who is owning the overall transformation and communicating it very clearly to the teams around how that can be adopted, how that can be rolled out, are the ones that succeed. Secondly, governance. Looking at the feasibility of the solutions and making sure we have the right governance, not only from technical perspective, but from regulatory and organizational perspective, are the ones that succeed, and leaders are not scared to adopt.
Yeah.
Next is around data fragmentation. Having worked with other verticals also, I see more data fragmented on life sciences side than other verticals. Although there are many, many good things other verticals can learn from life sciences as well. But I think we need to acknowledge that the across different parts of value chain, data is going to be on different platforms. And we need to keep that into consideration when building the solutions. It is going to be fragmented. You cannot solve it overnight, but how are you building solutions so that we are starting small with what you have, but having the long-term vision? One thing
Sense.
that comes to my mind lastly is about the
Yeah.
feedback loops, right?
Yeah.
And if you're not taking the feedback from the end users and you're working with the groups where you're just building and then you're rolling it in 3 months and there's no feedback, that's something I see doesn't work. But where we are regularly working with them in pods, a scientist, an engineer, and a solution leader sitting together and building it over a period of time is the one where I see it succeed.
That's a really helpful nugget too, right? It's that
Mm.
idea that not just the feedback, which everyone
Mhm.
can know, of course, you need feedback on your tool,
Mhm.
but who you put together in the development process and making sure you have that cross-functional mix in your development team. That's a really great nugget for people to take away as they think about development and who they put on the team. And the sponsorship, I think, is super important. I've seen that myself. Like, if you
Mhm.
have that genuine, like, we're doing this is happening kind of feel from the leadership that has commissioned the project and given it budget, and that can change the game if it's sort of a halfway effort. You're not
Mhm.
gonna it's not gonna actually stick. Let's shift gears a little bit toward just AI specifically, maybe
Mhm.
for a minute. Of course, everyone is
Yep.
always talking about AI. And one of the things I've been working on with several of our clients at Improzo is this idea of AI adoption playbooks. Like, how do we
Mhm.
actually really bring generative AI to our company? So, what are some of the things you're seeing or finding helpful when you think about that first step of AI adoption just kind of from the beginning? Because I know in
Mhm.
life sciences, there's a mix, but there are still
Mhm.
companies that are in the early adoption phase of AI.
Sure. I have worked on it over a period of time, and I have a 6-step approach
I love it.
that I coach customers on. The first one is to focus on the execution gap from the business perspective.
Yep.
Let's not look at the AI platform and try to see what can it solve. Let's go the other way around. Look at the specific execution gap and focus on that execution gap. How you do that is step number 2 is about mapping the workflow. Now sit with that scientist, knowledge worker, engineer, whosoever you're helping, and understand the workflow. I often mention that if you look at the history, AI stack is the one that's sitting closest to the end user. So you really have to work with that end user and understand their day-to-day work and map that workflow. The third one is around data readiness and the guardrails around that. So understanding where the data is, what type of guardrails are we trying to put around to make sure that we are taking care of the security, regulatory, and GXP compliance? I see data readiness step, quite frankly, skipped. We need to focus on that. And then, even before we start writing the first line of code, now that we have taken care of what the execution gap is, what the workflow is, what the readiness is, now let's do a tabletop exercises and conversation on adoption framework. What would it really look like after it's launched? And what do you need to do even before it's launched?
Yeah.
So once you have the adoption framework ready, then you go towards the fifth step in my book, the pilot. Let's
Mhm.
start small, but design for scale. And once you have the very first pilot that you're trying, sixth step is the measurability aspect, which is to have strong instrumentation around what is being used, where do they spend more time, where do they spend less time when the solution is presented, and who's the named owner to solve a particular problem. So I think those 6 steps, when
Yep.
taken care of in that order, I've seen those solutions succeed for most part.
And I love this notion of the measurability and the
Mhm.
designing for scale, both of those. Are there is it I mean, I guess there's something that maybe people it sounds like data prep maybe is the one, but are there other things people commonly kind of forget to do when they're getting started on an AI playbook?
Indeed, adoption never comes to play. Adoption and change management becomes an afterthought, as I mentioned earlier. So
Yeah.
those are the two things I feel we need to start from the very beginning.
I do think that's one of the things that's so hard because the people who are probably at the front lines of a lot of this AI work are they love technology, they're
Mhm,
technophiles, they're excited about the tech,
mhm,
but other people may not be, and it's
mhm.
a totally different mindset when you're not a fan of new technology, and so figuring out how to bridge that sort of mental gap between how could you not love this
Right.
to I don't wanna do this. Like, that's an interesting, I think, just a behavioral psychology sort of challenge, and that's always right? It's the people. Like, if you think about
Indeed.
people, process, technology, like, people are the hard part. Like, the
Right.
process and technology might actually be the easier we don't like to admit that, right? Because 'Cause we're techie people, but
Right.
that is yeah, and one of the things when we were getting ready for this conversation that I just loved, and I wanted to make sure we kinda dig in on this a little bit, is this concept that you brought up around perception versus perspective,
Mhm,
when you're approaching AI from different angles like
mhm,
this, right?
mhm.
Tell me more about that idea and how does that look what does that look like in practice when you're talking about perception versus perspective?
Indeed, the way it is, the technical teams look at a solution as a capability that they're going to build and provide to the end user. But business teams, they look at the capability, but they look more at the risk with the capability.
Yeah.
So I think when you see the skepticism, it is a signal from the line of business that we need to start looking at their perspective rather than our perception. And how do you do that? We do that by asking the right questions and solving the problem the right way. In other words, asking them, what would the system need to do to show you that the system is secure? It's going to bring you the right ROI and save you the time, or it's going to do a better job than some of the humans do today, or can be a better companion to humans. I think that's when we see that the customers gravitate towards the solution. And then how do we eventually translate the overall work that we're going to do for business leaders into a tangible outcome? I think those are the things where I see the conversation and start from the technical perspective, don't go that far, but we then started the line of businesses. And that's across all the silos, be it manufacturing, R&D, commercial. When we sit with the leader and look at their priorities, look at their imperatives and start solving for their needs and lead from the need rather than technology, things work very well.
Yeah. No, that's a really I think that's another piece of the puzzle, right? This idea
Mhm.
of what's the problem
Right.
rather than what solutions do we have available to us. And I do think one of the patterns I'm starting to notice, and I think it's fair, is when someone's a really deep expert and they've spent, say,
Mhm.
20 years doing a thing, and then you tell them, oh, AI can do it in like 3 seconds, that's hard to believe, right? Like that's
Yes.
legitimately confusing and hard to believe. And maybe the reality is it doesn't actually do it in three
Mhm.
seconds. It's because you have that experience and expertise that allows you to use the tool to go
Mhm.
faster.
Mhm.
But when people say, "Oh, I can do this in 3 seconds," you're kinda like, I that it's unbelievable. It's and you have a reasonable, healthy skepticism of that, right? So, I think that's when we get into this concept of, like, the fear of AI, and I think it's
Mhm.
very real,
Mhm.
and to a certain extent, some parts of jobs, maybe not the entire job, but some parts of jobs are gonna dramatically change or go away. And then there's also the idea of like, how do we prove that we did this the right way if we're using these tools? Like, versus a human being just writing down what they're doing is a lot easier to document. So, how do you kind of navigate that cultural resistance and fear of AI adoption? And obviously, to an extent, acknowledge it because it's real,
Mhm.
but also like,
Mhm.
what do you do to kind of reset the thinking around AI?
Sure. One of the things that I've learned is that we need to lead with the proof rather than the conversation.
Yeah.
So, approaching the customer problem where you can start small and show augmentation over a short period of time and let end users play with it.
Yeah.
And that's where I see the appreciation comes, where you have a small subset of the problems were solved. I'll give you a simple example where we worked with the customer and built a paper peer. where now scientists, when they're working on the workflows, they can go to this tool that can go look at the PubMeds, look at their internal documentation, and understand what that scientist is doing today
Mhm.
and find the right material, be it proteins, be it a disease, be it a DNA sequence, whatever they're working on, find the right reference material based on the current scientist's question and give it to them. And I saw that when we did the first prototype with them, I saw a relief on scientists' faces because now we are saving them time.
Yeah.
And it's a companion. It's not going to replace that scientist, but it's a companion that's going to help them.
And
Uh,
I'd love some more
mm,
examples on this cross value
sure,
chain piece, if you can kind of weave those in as you're talking about this.
sure. So, for example, we worked with one of the customers where the reps were prepping the call before talking to HCPs. Took about 40 minutes for rep to prepare for the call. And we looked at that flow and we said, how can we help that rep build discussion points under 10 minutes? So we looked at the workflow. What are the workflow elements that those reps are working on? Then we have the agents going into the different systems, looking at the CRM, looking at the publication, looking at the drug history, and also what HCP is prescribing and
Right.
what HCP's behavior is. And now we are building a perspective. And while the rep is sleeping, the application is building a report for him to look at in the morning.
Yeah.
So when we did the experimentation, the 40 minutes of work took about 7 minutes for him to work on. It's really making the rep efficient. And now you look at the ROI and multiply it with 2,000 reps across the organization. It's a game changer.
Yeah, no, it's incredible, and it's interesting. It makes me think of one of the things we've been working at Improzo is the idea of the post conversation work. So we kind
Mhm.
of obviously there's the pre conversation prep work, which it sounds like you're
Right.
tackling. We've been thinking about, okay, I've had this conversation. Now I need to document obviously who I talked to, what I talked about, if I
Right.
left anything behind, if there's a follow up or next step or what's happening. And I think the insight was that, it's a job that involves a lot of being on the move. And so if there
Mhm.
was a way to just talk into your phone or whatever and put all that information in a quick sort of verbal format and then convert
Mhm.
it, so voice to text, into all of the mappings of whatever the CRM needs to capture. And folks could do that kind of throughout the day. And at the end, when they get home, they've already got essentially good 80% of what they need to do for their call logging activity done and dusted, and then they just confirm everything and send it to the CRM. So there's still a human in the loop.
Mhm.
And then I think the other thing we were talking about with that is obviously if you're just talking, you might mention some PHI on accident, or you
Mhm.
might mention an adverse event, or you might mention something that so how do we flag all that so that we're
Mhm.
taking care of it up front? So this is the same idea. Like, how do you really think about a day in the life and the workflow and where there's gaps, and then try to sprinkle in accelerators, I'll call it, to
Mhm.
getting that work done. And you're exactly right. You can measure, right, the time that was being spent every day logging into basically administrative work
Mhm.
and how much you can reduce that. And if you multiply that out by how many times that if it's something that happens
Right.
frequently and there's a lot of people
Mhm.
doing it,
Mhm.
then the ROI can be really incredible and
Mhm.
makes total sense that that's kind of the types of examples that
Mhm.
work well. But you have to be able to measure it, to your point. I think that's the other piece is like if you can't measure how much it takes today, you won't be
Right.
able to see like how much of this you had that 40 minutes and then the 7 minutes. Now you have
Right.
33 minutes. Like you have a very concrete measurement of the impact. So I love that example. Any other examples you want to share? I
Sure.
feel like that was a great
Sure.
one.
For example, we were working with adverse events.
Yeah.
Adverse events are coming from all sorts of channels,
Mm.
through phone calls, through online channels, through social media. And now, in certain cases, customers have a large number of employees filtering those adverse events early in the cycle. When the call comes in, it's the generative AI and our agentic AI solution that's looking at the data and making sure all the data is in the right format and all the
Yep.
available data is in the system. Where we see the confidence score is low and some things are missing, that we are triaging to the human beings. And we are now looking at the processing of the data as well. And how can we save that time and look at the FDA filings and all of those things around those events. But interestingly, what we noticed that all of that manual busy work that customers were doing before is gone now. And one of the
Yeah.
customer leaders told me, look, we had a goal to grow without growing, and this is exactly what we need to offer.
And I think that's the other It
Mhm.
may not be that you're reducing headcount,
Mhm.
but you may
Mhm.
not need to increase headcount, which is
Headcount.
still an impact, right? That's still
Right.
valuable.
Right.
Exactly.
Lastly, I have a very interesting example around the manufacturing as well. We know most of the manufacturing organizations, for the right reasons, they have SOPs, and over a period of time, there's a lot of duplications that has been built into the SOPs, right?
Yeah, of
So,
course.
so we started with a solution to look at those duplications and remove the duplications. So where's the master document? Who's referring it? But that was a generative AI problem that we could solve. We double click into the workflow of and learn that we are saving time by putting the right content and building it in the right way so the duplication is removed. But the customer is still spending a lot of time finding where the duplication is.
Ah, yeah.
So we built a very comprehensive graph rack based solution for that organization where it can go through your SOPs and build a graphic view of what is being referenced where and made it highly efficient for that customer. So that's another example where we are making that human's job easy so they can be more productive.
Yeah, I love that. And that probably tracking down the flow and connections of SOPs to each other wasn't the most valuable thing that person was doing, right? They had
Right.
other skills that were much more relevant and helpful
Mhm.
to the overall business. And so that's exactly the kind of stuff you want to, it's the low hanging fruit of where we're
Mhm.
heading.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it hopefully gets people to see this is about making your day a more pleasant day because you're not
Right.
doing things that you don't want to be doing.
Mhm.
And then also that you're creating and freeing up space for more creative thoughts, for more maybe innovation or improvements, right? Other things that humans do really well is
Mhm.
that white space piece that we're trying to be able to have time for, which is often like very minimal, right? At the end
Mhm.
of the day, just to be able to think. So that's great for today where we are today. But I want to get a sense of maybe as always in any conversation, like what's the future look like, right? So if you look at the next year or so, which is that's about as far as I would be willing to go because
Mhm.
things are changing so fast. I mean, I think of
Right.
just 6 months ago, things were
Mhm.
completely different. So what is the AI adoption going to look like in life sciences? Where do you think there's going to be more chipping away at these manual administrative processes?
Mhm.
And so just give me a little bit of your crystal ball. What's the Navdeep crystal ball saying to you?
Right, absolutely. And I feel like working with some of these customers who are so ahead of the curve, it feels like future is already here.
Yeah.
So
Well,
having
AWS, I mean, like you're already yeah.
and some of the customers, I think first and foremost, that if you look at next 18 months at from agentic AI perspective, we are getting to enabling citizen developers on do-it-yourself solutioning. And more I work with the line of businesses, I feel that we need to empower them because they know what makes them more efficient.
Yeah.
So instead of asking AI leaders and asking ITs to what we need to build, we need to give them level blocks. And some of the customers are already building that.
Mhm.
Where an end user, we call it citizen developer, can come and pick the right Lego blocks and solve the problem they want to solve themselves. They do have support, but that's the first thing I see some of the customers embarking on. The second thing around the governance. Today we have guardrails and we have governance processes in an organization, but I see that over the period, the guardrails are smart enough to understand what the organization's AI policies, what are the regulatory needs, who's coming in to use the system, what's the role and why they're using the system, and be smart about it. In life sciences, it's more important because I see some of the customers are working on, for example, trusted research environment, where they can share that environment, bring their own data, do things together. I think once we have that flexible, smart guardrails and technical policy ecosystem, I think that will work very well.
Wow, that's super exciting. I mean,
Yeah.
genuinely, like that's going to make things so much better for every role across lots of different parts of the business.
Mhm.
This has been like such a fantastic conversation. I've just enjoyed so much getting to hear from you. What I want to do is a couple of things. I mean, obviously, where can folks find you? Do you have, we'll put a link in the, where we put the podcast, but I'm assuming LinkedIn is a good place for people to
Indeed.
connect with you. Perfect.
Indeed. Absolutely.
And then the other thing is in terms of just like the last word on this whole story, for me, it was definitely that idea of adoption being like the missing piece and the core, and really thinking through where you want to play and where you want to start working with people so that they can see the value in adoption.
Mhm.
What's some of the other? I want to make sure just you have the last word on this conversation. So, what else would you take away from what we've been talking about today?
I think I'll just echo the same thing. We do need to focus on the human aspect
Mhm.
and adoption aspect, as you just mentioned. Because again, the stack is so close to human that if we don't understand human, if we don't understand organizational patterns, if we don't understand the needs, I think we are missing the mark there.
That's great.
So
And I think that's the hard part, right? The human.
that's the hard part. So that's where I think the organizations that are going to bring customer success, end user success, and technology together are going to have better success as compared to the others.
Thank you again so much, Navdeep. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I appreciate your insights and look forward to another conversation in the future, I'm sure. So thank you, sir.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Jane, for having me.
Thanks.
This has been the Improzone, improving life, empowering customers. Follow us and stay tuned for what's next.